All right, welcome to The Explainer. We've all seen the movies, right? But what does science actually tell us about the next big plague? Today, we're going to separate the Hollywood hype from the real-world threats that actually keep scientists up at night.
Yeah, when you hear next pandemic, your mind probably jumps straight to the movies, to these huge, dramatic, cinematic scenarios.
You know the stuff I'm talking about. Ancient viruses thawing out of the ice caps, some killer germ from a meteorite, or of course the classic bioengineered superbug escaping from a lab. But how real are those fears? Are they just movie plots?
All right, so let's get into it. Let's start separating what's just fiction from the facts that are scientifically plausible. So let's just compare the possibilities here. Our source expert, Dr. Gelfand, puts it this way. A virus from space successfully infecting us. It's like finding a random key from another galaxy that just happens to perfectly fit your front door. The odds are not great. Same thing for those ancient viruses from the ice. Think about it. They've never seen a human before, so they wouldn't have the right key to get into our cells. The real threats? Oh, they're much closer to home. In fact, they're already here, and they're growing.
Okay, so let's talk about the first major threat. And this one, it's not a sudden explosion. It's more like a slow-motion disaster, a tidal wave that's been building for decades, antibiotic resistance. And if you want to see just how fast this is happening, check out this incredible experiment scientists ran.
Okay, so picture this. A massive petri dish, basically a racetrack for bacteria. At the starting line, they put some E. coli. But this wasn't an ordinary track. It had these zones, these hurdles, with stronger and stronger doses of antibiotics. The bacteria just flew through the first zone where it was safe. But then, bam, they hit a wall. The first zone with a lethal dose.
But here's where it gets mind-blowing. The bacteria paused, and then they started to adapt. In just 11 days, let that sink in, 11 days, a new strain had evolved that could survive a dose 1,000 times stronger than the one that was supposed to kill it. That is evolution on hyperdrive.
And here's the really important thing to understand. Dr. Gelfand points out that this doesn't create some new, more vicious superkiller bug. No, it just makes the bacteria we already know immune to our drugs. It's like we're sending them back to the 19th century, when we had no treatment at all for things like tuberculosis.
And this isn't just a lab experiment. A perfect and pretty terrifying real-world example is drug-resistant TB. Dr. Gelfand explains how, in some prison systems, incorrect or unfinished antibiotic treatments turned these places into basically bioreactors. They were accidentally breeding the absolute toughest, most resistant strains of TB, which then get carried out into the general population. It's a public health time bomb. All right, that was the slow threat. Now for the fast one. Threat number 2 is that sudden shock, the lightning strike, of a virus jumping from an animal to a human. The scientific term for this is zoonosis.
And to really grasp just how devastating a jump like this can be, we need to look back in time, way back, to the 16th century. A mysterious disease the Aztecs called cocolisti swept through their empire. The result? It wiped out up to 90% of the entire population. Just gone. And for 500 years, nobody knew what it was. It was one of history's great medical mysteries. But then, modern science came into play detective. Scientists were able to extract ancient DNA from the teeth of skeletons in burial sites. And the killer they found wasn't some exotic, unknown plague. It was Salmonella, a strain of it anyway, likely brought over by Europeans.
So you might be asking, Salmonella, how could that cause an apocalypse? Well, it's because the Aztecs were what's called a naive population. That's a scientific term, and it basically means their bodies had never ever seen this germ before. They had zero immunity built up. It wasn't about the bug being a supervillain, it was that their immune systems were completely defenseless. And that right there is the exact danger we face today when a new virus makes the jump.
And we see this happening all the time. HIV? That jumped from chimps to humans back around the 1920s. Bird flu is one we watched like a hawk, because we're terrified it could mix its genes with human flu and create a perfect storm. And then you've got things like MERS, which jumps from camels. It's incredibly deadly, but luckily for us, it's not very good at spreading from person to person.
So, all of this brings up a really big question. When it comes to the next plague, should we be more worried about Mother Nature or ourselves?
Well, it turns out human error is a huge factor. Just look at what happened in Sverdlovsk back in 1979. A guy at a Soviet bioweapons lab just forgot to replace a filter on an exhaust valve. One tiny mistake, and because of it, a cloud of weaponized anthrax spores was released,
killing at least 66 people. And of course, this leads us right to the big contentious debate about the origins of COVID-19. Now, Dr. Gelfand makes a really important distinction here that often gets lost in all the noise. He says there are two very different scenarios. One is a lab leak, where maybe a scientist gets accidentally infected with a completely natural virus they collected from a bat for study. The other is a lab creation, where a virus is intentionally modified in a lab to be more dangerous. These are not the same thing.
And on that second point, that it was man-made, he is very clear. His take is that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And right now, he says, there is no evidence that this virus was specially modified. All of its genetic quirks look like something that could have, and does, happen in nature.
So, okay, we've talked about the movie plots versus the real dangers. Given what we now know, where should we actually be focusing our energy to get ready for what's next?
When you boil it all down, it really comes down to two different kinds of threats, two faces of the next pandemic. You've got the slow, creeping crisis of superbugs, driven by our misuse of antibiotics, and then you have the sudden, lightning-fast leap of a new virus jumping from animals to us.
So here's what you should really take away from all this. Forget the sci-fi stuff. The most sensational threats are probably the least likely. The real dangers are already here. The slow-motion crisis of antibiotic resistance, and the constant, unpredictable threat of viruses jumping from animals. And what that means is that nature is still the biggest threat out there, but our own systems, our hospitals, our travel networks, our politics, they can amplify a disaster from a small spark into a global inferno. The answer isn't panic, it's preparation.
And that's our explainer. Look, we all just lived through COVID-19. It was a brutal test for the entire world, and man did it show us the cracks in our global preparedness. So we'll leave you with this thought. The question isn't if another pandemic is coming, it's when. And are we, are you, truly ready for what's next?